What's going on, you guys? My name is Uncle Jesse, and today we are going to be taking a look at the largest resin 3D printer that I have ever had the opportunity to get my hands on. This right here inside this big, huge box is the new Phrozen Transform Resin 3D printer. Let's get it unboxed and get our first print going and check it out. All right, you guys, so I'm just actually gonna cut in right here on the video. I've actually been printing with this thing for the better part of a week and a half now, I would say. On and off, I had to go to New York Comic Con and busy with work and all those other things, but what I wanted to do is this video is getting really long as I'm editing it, and I decided to come back here and do this style where I'm going to just jump right in and tell you my initial thoughts on this, and if you want to go through and then watch the full unboxing setup, and then where I'm starting to talk about a few of these initial prints, you can catch that towards the tail end of this video. And again, this is going to be a little bit longer format than my normal style videos, but it's a really in-depth one here. So this is not a full review by any means. I haven't had enough time to play with this. But it's my initial thoughts on the printer, and again, this is a relatively early unit, but I believe something that you can expect from when they start shipping this out to most of the people here over the next handful of weeks or within this month here in October. So this is the Phrozen Transform. It retails for $1,800. It's available right now over on Indiegogo with their campaign where you can save a little bit of money, and I believe that's $1,400 is the price that they've got this listed as right now for this particular unit. It's a really impressive, massive resin 3D printer. I've already done one video where I was showing you the Red Hood Oni mask here that I was able to print all in one piece, which was ridiculously cool. I'm still blown away by the build volume on this thing, which is just insane, absolutely insane compared to other resin 3D printers. Let me pull out my phone here. I've got some details on this. So the build volume is 11.5 by 6.5 by 15.75 inches. So that's almost 16 inches vertically that you're able to print with. It's basically, there's like an iPad here that you're using as a screen to do all of the resin curing or however that works there. All the technology behind this, I don't know. I'm not the most technically savvy person. I just like printing cool stuff and sharing it with you guys. But let me jump in and tell you guys some of my thoughts on this printer, and then we'll look at some of these other prints that I've run off and done. And again, you can go through and see the full setup of this afterwards. So the biggest thing is obviously going to be print quality. What does it look like? I think for such a large resin printer, I have only printed at 0.05 millimeters so far, and it looks really good. I'm not really seeing any major differences between, let's say, the Minic file that I printed at 100% scale here between this and my Elgu Mars, and I absolutely love the Elgu Mars. And yeah, I think both look absolutely fantastic. I'm getting lots of detail information captured on this, and it's picking it all up beautifully. So I think this is, you know, detail-wise, you're going to get really good results from this. There are some things that we'll look at here in a few minutes when I'm working with these other larger prints that, depending on, again, how you orient these things, it's going to impact visible layer lines that you might see and the amount of supports that you're going to need. I mean, one thing that you're going to really have to consider is not only the price point of this is more expensive than some of these other resin 3D printers, but you're going to end up having to buy a lot of resin to print some of these larger scale things. So if you're planning on just printing lots of miniatures, this might not be the best printer for you. But if you're a digital artist and you want to print some statues, or you're like myself, you want to print some cosplay items in a much larger capacity, you don't have to print these things off in multiple parts and then try and assemble them. I could probably print a full helmet in 2 pieces, which I will be trying very soon. The bed here will basically hold 1 liter of resin without any issues. So I'm a big fan of the Ceratec resin. So with one order, which will get you 2 500 milliliter bottles, it's going to basically fill up the full vat here. I was able to print with the Phrozen resin that came with this actual unit. I was able to print all of the little miniature statues here, plus the actual Oni mask, and I still have some resin left over. Probably not enough to do another mask, but at least enough to do a few more smaller prints. However, for the Nova statue that I'll be talking about, this is all printed with the Ceratec Fast White resin. That took almost 2 full bottles of resin to actually print. Again, I've got a little bit of resin left over here in the vat, which is enough to print some smaller models, I'm assuming, but definitely not enough for me to run off and print another one of these again. I also just want to show you a visual comparison of the build plate for the Transform compared to what I consider to be one of the typical standard resin printers. So this is the Elegoo Mars build plate. I could easily fit 1, 2, 3, maybe 4, maybe 3.5 versions of this build plate on this one massive Transform build plate. It's incredible, absolutely incredible. You'll also notice that it's perforated here as well. So what this does, at least in my experience here working with this, is the first time I've worked with a build plate that's like this. It actually, for these larger prints, it adheres really well to these little holes. You end up getting some of the cured resin inside those holes, and it's very, very sturdy when it comes to keeping my prints on the actual build plate. What that ends up causing, though, is I have a heck of a time getting the actual prints and the supports off of the build plate afterwards. Not necessarily a bad thing, again, just something that you need to be aware of, that you're gonna have to muscle some of the supports off of this, and I definitely would recommend printing almost everything with supports or something touching the base. I would not print anything flat on this. Anytime you print something flat on this, you need to be aware that you're going to end up having those perforated bubbles on the underside of your print. So if you're trying to have something that's displayed and have that as a flat piece that's going to be displayed, you're going to have these little bubbles that you're going to have to sand smooth or clean up in some way or another. Also, random side note, I managed to lock up this right bolt here that secures the build plate. The only thing I can think of is maybe resin got inside there and has cured or hardened. So after this video, I'm going to take this everything out and try to, as best I can, maybe spray this down with IPA to loosen it up and just get that free again. Because right now, I can only tighten and secure one side, which has worked okay for some of these prints, but I really want to make sure that this thing doesn't pop off or get knocked loose. A failed print with a build volume of this size is going to be a very pricey failure compared to something like the Photon or Elegoo Mars, where you're printing such a small piece on a small build volume. If I do a 2-day print here and this fails, woo, I would not be happy. Also, in terms of the price point of being $1,800 as sort of the ticket price, that's right around the area that I was hoping these would be, at least here initially. I do not expect these to be like a CR10 where it's for 500 bucks you're gonna get a huge resin printer. We're not there yet. Maybe another year or two, who knows? As the tech continues, the prices continue to drive down and technology improves. But right now, under $2,000 for this size build volume is ridiculously cool in my opinion. In terms of the actual setup and assembly of the printer, it was super simple and straightforward. Basically, it came in 2 boxes, one huge box for the printer itself and another box for the build plate, some accessories, as well as a bottle of resin. So I basically just took it out of the box. I had to install these door handles and then put the actual build plate in the machine, and it was pretty much good to go. I just needed to get it all level and work through actually getting a print going. And let's chat about that for a second. All right, so before I talk about the actual touchscreen and some of my, let's say, complaints about working with the actual unit, let me just briefly mention that the unit did not come with any instructions, and I think that's honestly because this is an early review unit. I'm assuming they'll have some sort of an online manual or a digital manual or something that you'll be able to run through that will help you get up and running more effectively, especially for people that might never have used a 3D printer. We honestly can't forget about those folks. But thankfully, the folks over at Phrozen sent me some documents to help me get going with this. This machine has its own slicer that it works with that Phrozen has put together. It doesn't work on a Mac. I'm pretty much exclusively working on Macs here in my house between iPads, iPhones, and my MacBook Pros. So that was kind of out of the question, but thankfully it works with Chitubox. So I was able to do load my files up into Chitubox. There was a profile setting info that they were able to pass over to me. I was able to generate all of my supports in Chitubox and then export that as a zip file and then put that on an SD card. In the back of this unit are 2 USB ports. One USB port that you can put in for your files there. The other is intended to be used for the wireless capabilities, which I was very much looking forward to using for this machine. I love any printer that supports wireless functions so I can remotely send files back and forth or monitor the printer or do whatever it may be from my computer. However, I've only been able to ever connect to it once via the wireless functionality. So the other big complaint that I had with that, and before I get into all this in the touchscreen, is that if I try to actually set up my Wi-Fi network here on screen, I can't do that because it doesn't really and truly support all of the special characters needed for setting up Wi-Fi networks. I have an overly complex Wi-Fi password for good reasons, and I can't actually plug that in to the touchscreen here. It only allows very basic numbers, letters, and like 4 or 5 or 8, I can't remember exactly, not all of the special characters that you can use. Also here on the back of the machine is an Ethernet port. So I have mine connected via Ethernet port to my network. That's how I have it connected here. And then I can access the printer via the IP address. Again, I was only ever able to connect to that once and not really ever do anything. It basically locked up as soon as I tried to do anything, so I can't really give you any input on that. But apparently, based on info on the Facebook group and other Phrozen machines, there are lots of people using that interface. So maybe it's either something here with my network or something with the machine that's having issues with it. I don't know entirely. There's also a micro SD slot here on the back of the machine, and there is a supplied micro SD card. I've seen micro SD cards supplied with, dozens of other printers. I assume that's maybe where the files were, test files, other thing like that, manuals. No. It seems like it's what the firmware or the instructions or whatever it is that tells this printer what to do, and it needs that file in the machine at all time. If it's not in there, it's gonna lock up and not work correctly. So talking about this massive touchscreen, it is a very nice touchscreen. It's like a 5-inch touchscreen. Works really well. There is some confusing terminology and confusing functions on this that I'm hoping get addressed with somewhere of a firmware update in the future. One, I've never worked with a Phrozen machine before, and apparently there's something called plates here. I had no idea what that was, but plates in Phrozen world means that's your files that you're gonna print with. I was so confused. I could not figure out how to access files. I was like, this thing has to have a test print file somewhere on here. And that's where it is. It's under this plates menu. There was a test file, which I was never able to get to successfully print. However, all of the other files that I ran off and sliced in Chitubox and passed over to the machine worked perfectly. By the way, the whole process that I go through is I create a file in Chitubox, export as a zip, put it on a SD card or a USB SD card here, load it into the back of the machine, go into plates, then go into read from the SD card. It copies it from the SD card onto the machine itself. And then there is a profile here on the machine that's preloaded. I have no way to update this profile. I believe that's through the web interface or with their PC-only software where I can adjust that, but I've just been rocking it as is, and it will actually slice on board here the files that I've passed over. So regardless of what I've fed into Chitubox, it sort of ignores that and is just looking at the actual STL or all of the generated supports and doing all the slicing on the machine. Again, that's what I believe it's doing. Who knows? It could be doing something entirely different, but I don't believe it's actually using the info directly from Chitubox. One of the other biggest confusing things that I had here was if I go under Z axis, I can move up and down the build plate. That works great. However, I could not, for the life of me, figure out how to level the bed on this machine. You have to go into this menu system, and there's a dot between the up and down arrow, and that's the button you click to actually do your bed leveling. Why isn't there a dedicated bed leveling button on this massive screen? I have no idea. I have no idea. It would make complete sense to me that they would put one there. Hopefully that gets updated in the future, but thankfully there is another YouTuber that has this printer, and I was able to find him and watch a bunch of his videos. That YouTuber is Dungeon Printer, so I'll have links down below to his channel. Go check him out, go give him some love. If you're interested in more videos and his thoughts on this machine and some of the challenges that he went through getting prints going, some of the successes, watch his content. Again, I went through and watched basically all of his videos. That really helped me get it up and running and help troubleshoot some of the challenges that I was having with this machine. He's also having a good bit more issues getting successful prints than I am. I don't entirely know why that is. I don't know if there's something going on with his build plate or the machine and the unit itself, or the way that he's slicing versus how I'm slicing files, or the resin that he's using. There's a whole lot of different variables in this, but I know that he's having some issues printing with this, where I've had basically really great success. Other than the test print, that's the only failed print I've had with this machine. One other additional thing I want to call out is that this machine, when it's actually up and running and printing, is pretty loud. So just keep that in mind. It's got, I think, 3 or 4 different fans on this. I'm assuming that's to keep this thing cool, the LEDs, the lights, or however that's powering this thing, nice and cool when it's up and running. So just keep that in mind. If you've got a studio space or an office or whatever it is that you're working in and planning on getting one of these, it's gonna kick off some background noise for you. But most importantly, let's talk about the prints. And again, this is where, in my opinion, this thing is excelling. It's a large resin 3D printer, and I'm getting really good results from this actual machine. And the first one I want to talk about here is this David Ousman Batman bust. This is one of my favorite prints to actually work with. It's just beautiful. The sculpting on this, the details came out absolutely amazing, but the details on this came out really great. I mean, really, really great with this resin. Here I'm getting some a little bit of layer line. I don't know if it's shifting or what I was seeing in some of the prints. And again, I don't know if that's because of my build plate or what, but it's really not that noticeable throughout the print. I am noticing it on these really flat surfaces here, but a little bit of sanding, and that would pretty much be all gone from there. I also have this cast and play Minic file. This is my basic go-to print here for every resin printer that I go with. And it's just such a fun, awesome print. And again, the details on this came out really nicely. One thing that you'll notice here that I was trying to go for is not only working with smaller files, but also working with some larger files. That makes a lot of sense. I should say, in the reverse of that here is not just large files, but also smaller files. I want to make sure that small files could actually print nicely on this, because one thing with this build plate, you might not even be using the full build volume for this, but if you're printing off, let's say you have an Etsy business and you need to print off a whole bunch of minis, this is an awesome option for you to be able to mass print. I was able to probably fit, if I wanted to, I could probably fit, I don't know, 10 to 20 of these guys on one build plate. It would be pretty impressive to be able to run off and print. And the other really cool thing about resin printing versus FDM printers is if I'm printing 20 of these and it's the same build height, it's going to print the same amount of time as if it was 1 file or 20 files. That's not the same on an FDM printer. If I load up a CR10 with 20 of these, it's going to take 20 times longer than it was to do 1 file. Well, maybe that math's not entirely right, but you get the idea. One of my other go-tos is the Loki bust by Fotis. Again, this came out really nice. I am seeing some little print marks, but again, I think this has to do with me just printing it entirely vertically and straight on the build plate versus angling it slightly. The more you angle your prints with these resin printers, the better the results are going to be on the front facing side of it. And then here I have the Dr. Manhattan little miniature by Wekster. I printed the version here that has underwear. He also has a version without underwear. These are on his Patreon as well. And yeah, this came out really nicely. Again, I'm seeing a little bit of a layer shift here on the top. I'm not entirely, again, sure why that happened. It might have been wobbling slightly. Maybe my table was wobbling slightly. I don't entirely know, but I'm not really seeing that on these larger prints that I did afterwards. So here is the Oni mask that I had a video that you can find up above if you haven't seen that already. And this was the first full mask, resin mask that I've ever printed, and it just came out ridiculously nice. I'm very excited to sand this smooth, get some primer thrown down on it, and get it painted. This should really help reduce the amount of time it takes to actually make a replica prop or a mask on a resin printer like this. Again, if you're planning on doing things like mold making to make copies of these to be able to sell, this is a great option for you. However, if you're just planning on making a one-off for yourself, it might make more sense to print these on an FDM printer versus the cost it would take you to run off and print these in resin. And last but not least is this amazing 12-inch Nova statue bust that was created by Raf Grassetti, who is the art director for the PlayStation 4 God of War series. Yeah, pretty unreal. His work is stupidly amazing. I'll have links down below to his Instagram. We were chatting briefly over on Instagram and asked if he would mind sharing one of his files that I could print on one of these larger 3D printers. And he sent this over, and this came out really nice, really nice. I am super excited to get this cleaned up. So what I'll be doing here over the next week is here it was printed upside down, which you could see probably in some of the videos there. But I need to clean up where the support marks were and then get some primer thrown down on it. I'm still gonna have to do a little bit of sanding on this, where you can still see some layer lines. And again, actually, I do see a small layer shift in the chest. I don't know why that was happening. Again, I don't know if something shifted or if maybe it's the build plate is catching somewhere. It's very, very faint. I'll have to try and zoom in and see if I can capture this on camera for you guys. But it's something I should be able to get taken care of with a little bit of sanding after I get this all cleaned up. But yeah, this just is ridiculously nice. I am absolutely loving this. This is all hollowed out in Chitu box, supports added through Chitu box, and then again sliced and printed on this massive transform printer here. So super excited about this. Thank you again to Raf for actually sharing this file for me. You're probably not gonna be able to find this online anywhere. But I'm very happy that I was able to run this off and print this. So thank you again, sir. So by any means, this is not a review for this printer. I'm really digging this machine, issues and all. Having a really large resin printer is just so cool. And by the way, there are more resin printers in this larger format coming and in the works by other resin manufacturers. And Peopoly just announced theirs the other week, the Phenom. So hopefully I'll be getting my hands on with that here over the next week or two, where I'll be able to do some comparisons between these two printers and the different print options and printing large on this one versus large on the others. Also, just in terms of one thing that I forgot to mention on these, the smaller prints, I think I printed all of those in about 5 hours total. They were all loaded on one build plate. The mask here took about 24 hours almost on the dot. And then the Nova statue here took almost, I believe it was a little over 2 days to actually print. And I ended up using almost entirely 2 bottles of resin to actually print this guy here. So, but the results I think are super clean, super easy. This should be really nice post-processing for me to run in and clean up as well. But I just want to say thank you guys so much for hanging in here and watching this really long video. I'm actually going to split this up into 2, I think now, after just recording this portion. So immediately after this, I'll post another follow-up video that will actually be just more specifically the unboxing and getting to print the smaller files there. So I just want to say thanks again for watching, guys. If you're looking for more info on this particular printer, I'll have links down below to Phrozen, the Facebook group, Dungeons 3D printer YouTube page, as well as their the Phrozen Transform Indiegogo page, where you can actually check this out if you're interested in buying one for yourself. Stay tuned. I'll be doing more videos on this over the upcoming weeks as well, and eventually doing some comparisons of other larger resin 3D printers to this guy right here. Hey, thanks again for watching, you guys, and I will see you next time. Bye now.